we're going to take you into the fascinating world of simultaneous interpreting, a profession which demands speed, precision, and emotional mental focus. So, over the next few minutes, we'll discover what simultaneous interpreting is, why it matters in globalized world, and how it works. Also, some practical methods which can be applied by teachers or students to develop this skill. So what is simultaneous interpreting? Simultaneous interpreting is a process when an interpreter listens to a message and delivers it in another language almost instantly. So we have a time span here, so interpreter does not have a lot of time. He or she has to focus on this time span. They mostly prefer to keep it from 1 to 3 seconds delay. Also, this skill is widely used in international conferences, global summits, political negotiations, and some international organizations such as United Nations and European Parliament. Also, why do we use it? Because it enables us to communicate with people from different linguistic backgrounds without interruption and without any misunderstandings. How it works. How does simultaneous interpreting actually work? So, in practice, simultaneous interpreting forms a continuous chain. This chain is between the speaker, the interpreter, and the audience. So, imagine a conference. So, the interpreter has a headphone which enables him to understand and hear the message from the speaker. When the speaker gives the message, the interpreter hears it at the same time, and as we mentioned before, he has only 1 to 3 second time to send it to the audience, who also have the headphones and the receivers to get the message. If the interpreter may confuse the meaning or may hesitate, it probably can cause some misunderstandings and confusions. So this synchronized triangle helps the audience, listeners, and speakers, and also the interpreter get a close relation about the very topic. The ear-voice span that we mentioned before. So what is it? The ear-voice span is one of the most essential concepts in simultaneous interpreting, which refers to the delay between the hearing and production of translation. So it better be between 1 to 3 seconds, because when it is too short, the interpreter may fail to understand the meaning and may make a mistake. But also, when it is too long, the memory overload can occur. So professionals aim for a balance about this time span, and they try to keep it between 1 to 3 seconds. Essential skills for interpreters. An interpreter, while simultaneous interpreting, should use some abilities which people mostly don't have at the same time, of course. Firstly, they have to divide their attention. They have to focus on the speaker. They have to focus on speaking, because while they hear the speaker's sentences and their messages, they also have to keep speaking at the same time. Also, sometimes it happens, the sentences are too long and they have complex structures, so they have to anticipate what comes next. For example, if a sentence has a great complex structure, an interpreter should use the anticipation to get the next sentence or to get the next word. What can it be? Also, the chunking. Chunking is very popular about simultaneous interpreting, and teachers should teach it to students about some interpreting simulations, etc. It means that while translating, the interpreter should Also, it is actually related to the speaker's tone of voice and intonation. If the speaker cannot divide their speech into several parts, the interpreter also can have some difficulties related to it. So the interpreter should use chunking. They have to divide sentence parts into different sections and translate at the same time. And reformulation. Reformulation is actually the name of the general process because mostly the interpreter cannot get the whole meaning while listening to the speaker. That's why they mostly reformulate the meaning, how it happens and what can be next. And emotional control. Actually, this is also regarding our century and how teenagers are going to be our next generations and how some psychological and mental issues they have, because emotional control is probably the key factor here, because if you cannot keep your emotional control in the stability, it can cause some problems, because you listen to someone, you have to speak at the same time. No matter how much knowledge you have or how deep you are in that language, you have to keep this emotional control at a good level in order to show your ability and have a good performance. Why it is challenging? Of course, it is challenging according to some factors we just mentioned, but also the constant pressure should be mentioned, because interpreters cannot pose the speaker, cannot ask them to repeat what they have just said, because mostly they don't even have the access to the speaker. They hear the speaker, but the speaker cannot hear them, so they have to give the message and they have to deliver it in an amount which probably should be very short and should be understandable also. And they must reconstruct meaning and continue even when missing information. It happens absolutely, because when you listen to someone, you can observe that you can miss some information, but interpreter should accept it beforehand that I will miss some information. That's why they have to keep it throughout the process. They cannot interrupt it. They can only fill it with anticipation, like we said before, or they have to omit this information generally. And cognitive demands that simultaneous interpretation asks us to have. Firstly, fast speech. Sometimes speakers are from different nations and different status, so they have different kind of fast speech. Sometimes they speak very fast, very slowly, and interpreter has to get it, and they have to go at a natural pace. And unfamiliar accents. Of course, when you are translating a message from one language into another, you already know that you will get to know some unfamiliar accents, and it still needs you to anticipate and to try to understand what they can have said. Complex terminology. Mostly interpreters are people with deep knowledge about terminology, because they know that they can encounter different levels of terminology, probably because when they translate a text from a medical sphere or field, they get to know some medical terminology, or for example neuroplasticity. If you get to know this term in a speech, you probably have to be very fast and you have to translate it into the target language without hesitation. That's why they have to know this beforehand. Even if they don't know it, they have to guess, or sometimes they have to use the borrowing word, or they can give the definition if they have enough time for it. And cultural references. The interpreters shouldn't give the literal translation, because literal translation can cause some misunderstandings between different cultures. Why simultaneous interpreting is important in our global world, because this world demands a multilingual communication. That is why simultaneous interpreting enables us to bridge the simultaneous interpreting enables us to build a bridge between different cultures and different languages. Also, it enables us to support international cooperation, because if there were no simultaneous interpreters, probably it would take much more time for us to perform an international cooperation between different countries. Also, it prevents misunderstandings also in real time, and it builds the cultural bridges, as we mentioned before. So simultaneous interpreting is key for peaceful global interaction. And some training techniques for students and also teachers to teach at a lesson at the universities. First is shadowing. Shadowing is very important because it is probably the first step to take when you want to learn to speak, and also translation. Shadowing is to repeat what you hear in real time. There are a lot of sources in the internet for you to use and to teach your students. It can also be taught at a lesson with people, but it can cause some problems, because when you listen and when you hear the person and when you speak at the same time, when this three happen at the same time, the teacher can get confusion, because they can miss what the student actually said and what the speaker said. They can have difficulties differentiating this two. Translator's hot seat is an activity that one of the students sits in the hot seat, and they have to translate given sentences or sometimes words, maybe at the beginning of this process, at the same time without hesitation. And the fact that they shouldn't hesitate gives the permission and the ability to them not to have the weak confidence. So when you are in front of a lot of students, you have to say something. If you freeze, it is worse. That's why students always try to get their confidence when they're in front of a lot of people. And when they sit in that hot seat, they become more, more self-confident, and they have to be quicker than they are actually. Consecutive practice. Consecutive translation is another branch of interpreting or translation, in which the interpreter listens first and translates later. So a speaker talks for several seconds. For example, they say mostly one sentence or two sentences, at most 3 sentences. And then the interpreter tries to paraphrase it, reformulates it, and give the next translation. And it builds comprehension and memory, because you take your notes and you have to keep all your information on your mind. And even if you cannot, you can paraphrase what you already remember. Chunking drills, we have already talked about chunking drills. For example, imagine this sentence: identify meaningful units within complex sentences. This is chunking. You divide your sentence parts into different sections. And it helps process long ideas quickly, because you get the sentences not as sentences, like as in different chunks. And paraphrasing, sometimes we read a text, for example, of 5 sentences or 10 sentences, and we cannot deliver it at a very structure. So we have to give what we already remember of this text. This is paraphrasing. And one word out. This is also another activity for you to apply at your lessons, which demands for you to omit one word from your sentence and let the student get it. Because mostly, as we mentioned, mostly students or translators, even professionals, can miss a word. So they have to know how to deal with this kind of situations. You have to let them experience the situation before they actually experience it in a real world. conclusion and inspiration for you. So actually this lesson is for us to appreciate how deep and how challenging it is to do simultaneous interpreting. So it demands speed, it demands you to have a great memory and also the resilience about your emotional situation. So that's why we have to appreciate this profession, and also we have to take into consideration maybe we can be one of them. So effective training approaches that we have, we mentioned shadowing, translator's hot seat, or other activities that we can have through AI or other international classes, and some chunking drills. So thank you very much for joining this short journey, and I hope you have inspiration to be one of the next futures, next generations simultaneous interpreters. Thank you very much.